almost ready. Just one moment. Okay, I think we can start now. So I would first like to wish a warm welcome to all our presenters today, our guests from Delft and from London, who will be joining us online and talking about their work with LP Duo and also about different phenomena related to our project, Quantum Music. I would like also to welcome all guests who have joined us online to listen to these presentations. Today we will have 4 participants, and the first one is our good friend Alexander Barhic. I'm very happy to introduce him. Alexander is a lecturer at Goldsmiths, the University of London, at the Institute of Creative and Cultural Entrepreneurship. And he has been one of the creative producers of LP Duo for many years now. They have worked together on many projects, including the one that just finished last year, which was Duality, the project within which we developed this new prototype of the hybrid keyboard piano instrument, which is now being used for their performances all over the world. And Alexander's topic today is From STEM to STEAM, LP Duo and translating and interpreting between art and science. I can hear Sonia's voices. They're on the way. Here they are. Alexander, please, welcome. You need to unmute yourself.
Just a second to check the sharing function. And
you can sit here. We switched to this computer because of a better connection.
Mentioned you.
Okay, I couldn't understand. Actually,
about different things and about this conference.
I made a little film.
Oh, cool.
Very close to good. But I already saw you once this morning. Because I wanted to do on TV, so I stayed in my week.
So we have here like a little cinema now. So Alexander, whenever you're ready, you can start now.
yeah, I'm back. Things should be fine now.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, good. Okay, so good morning, everyone. It's earlier here in London than on your side, so don't mind, the way I look. I mean, I just woke up at -5 degrees in London, which is completely radical for this environment here. I know that for Belgrade, that's completely normal. I know that's normal for Delft, but like not really for us. Yeah, so we're kind of confused and shaking a bit, but all should be fine. We'll survive. So yeah, I'm really glad and honored to join the conference, and of course, especially because it's about interdisciplinary work surrounding Sonia, Andrea, and LP Duo, but also number of collaborators around them that worked together with them over the years, and I am one of them, and I'm honored to be part of their team. So I'll try to kind of open the day today with sort of perspective coming from social sciences, humanities, and arts in regards to what Sonia and Andrea do, and actually how how I'm thinking about the work that they're doing and that we're doing together. So what do I do besides being an academic in social sciences humanities university? Being a lecturer in cultural industries, creative entrepreneurship, arts management, cultural policy. I'm also, for more than 20 years now, a creative producer and an arts manager working in performing arts, music, and design. And but quite often, you know, it's like people from other realms ask me what is my job, and this is like an interesting kind of dialogue that I found recently in a film that I watched, Alice and the Mayor, when they hire this woman to work on ideas development, and I see that as sort of one of the core aspects of what I do together with LP Duo. Sort of connecting myself with their own duality. I add kind of myself to this equation, and we try to develop various ideas together. So one of the case studies that I will mention today briefly is related to a number of experiences, but one of the key experiences this year, which was one of the kind of crescendos of Beyond Quantum Music project also, is the performance of LP Duo on Arts Electronica Festival. And I will mention a couple of questions that came out of that case study in relation to the need of interpretation and translation, which can be connected to Bourdieu's concepts of habitus, and we'll get to that. But the kind of huge concept that you know, in my practice and in our practice we're starting from is this kind of sort of dialogue or conflict between the notions of STEM and STEAM, the science, technology, engineering, but also at mathematics, but also like where does this A come in, and what does art mean in this relationship? In the UK, scientific, social, cultural context, this kind of conflict became very radicalized in recent years. So it became radicalized also in the times of the pandemic, when the Minister of Education at that time in the UK started cutting the costs and cutting the funding for the research, education, social sciences, humanities, clustering the importance of funding in the categories of usefulness and uselessness, where from the point of view of the conservative government in the UK, social sciences, humanities, and arts are useless, and they deserve less funding than some of the aspects of the real science, which deserved way more funding, which during the pandemic proved to be useful. But this discussion is very interesting also from the philosophical point of view. We'll get to that at the end of my presentation, where how does the art see the concept of usefulness and uselessness in our own world, in our own angle. And because the funding was cut, the finance minister and actually the current prime minister in the UK said, when asked, like, so what should artists do now when the funding is cut? Said, like, well, you know, it's their decision. It's the lifestyle decision to do the arts, but they can find some other jobs. So some of the more musicians that worked in the symphony orchestras, that worked in the ensembles and so on, created a campaign, you know, to kind of mock this kind of policy decision of, you know, they're seen as useful or useless. So this is some of the campaign that part of the campaign that they created, you know, during the pandemic, what they had to do because their salaries were cut or they lost their jobs. So why am I starting with this? I'm starting with this because kind of the topic is the idea of interpretation and translation between the arts and science in the context of LP Duo's Quantum Music and Beyond Quantum Music project. So we're talking here about, right, research, but we have different ideas of research quite often when we get the encounters. What is the artistic research if we're talking here about the artistic research? It's, we can interpret it in different way, but Julian Klein, the composer and the director, kind of interpret it as it's sort of same as the scientific one. It's systematic creative activity of knowledge production that propelled by a desire for knowledge operates from state of not yet knowing. It's kind of helping us to understand each other across different cultures, traditions, and perspective, maybe. And this is how I guess we like to see it from the perspective of arts. But also the idea of artistic research is seen from the perspective of scientific research as a fad, as a trend, or as something which is just an empty word, because the scientific research is the only relevant thing. But simply artistic research by von Boris can be defined in a very simplified way as artistic research is a research done by artists or as part of their artistic practice. But at the same time, here in the UK, we have another concept which is actually integrated quite heavily in the academia, which is kind of the concept of practice as research, where you can actually do PhDs as practice as research PhDs in a certain sense, which again is controversial in the wider sense, also in other European countries, but also internationally. But UK is quite proud of being, as we know, different and going out of various unions and doing their own thing in their own way. And then scientific research, of course, compared to that, very solid. We know what we're doing as scientists, gathering, organizing, implementing information in order to understand, explain, or prove theory or topic. And since the time of enlightenment, we knew kind of what it is and what it does. But then we have a conflict here of understanding and interpretation of what kind of research we're doing when we're approaching the kind of same questions from different angles. So when thinking about the processes that we went through together and that the LP duo is jumping into very bravely, it came to my mind, an article by a former colleague at Goldsmiths, Angileri, and she was saying, she was kind of connecting the processes of, and trying to explain the process of translation and interpretation in relation to the processes of production and reproduction in kind of this local global social order, and connecting to Bourdieu's kind of concepts of habitus, field, capital, and illusion. I was thinking about what is the method, that LP duo, not the only ones on this planet that are trying to do that, but like innovative, experimental, and brave artists that are trying to move around various kind of habituses, fields, and spaces of illusion and capital. What kind of issues we're facing in this process of translation and so on. So I saw them and just a warning for scientists, I'm not kind of using the concept of Maxwell's demon in a literal sense or in a scientific sense, but for a more metaphorical sense. So in this concept of translation and interpretation, I sort of saw in practice what LP duo is doing as a sort of role of Maxwell's demon in a way of trying to, in a way which cannot be defined by a simple formula or algorithm, trying to sort of combine, confront, feel, sense, juxtapose, and use various other methods when connecting the art worlds, as Becker called them back in the days, and the world of science, or in this case, quantum physics, or even beyond. And in a certain sense, talking about the wider perspective that I started from, trying to resist the polarization and divide between the STEM and STEAM, mostly by softer methods, interpersonal methods, and also I would argue using love as a concept that is not discussed also in the arts, but discussed also in science and in the quantum physics. And art and science in the concept and in the practice of LP Duo is used as a methodology or as a method of communication in these cases. So what are the levels of division that LP Duo is facing in the work, and through this project? So first, the audience, as artists and performers, you need to, work with the audience and find various ways and constantly experiment and change in the ways of how we're communicating with the audience with this complex idea that is happening on the stage. So it's not anymore just like we are performing a work of well-known classical music composer and the audience knows what to do, what to expect, and we know already kind of what kind of communication will happen there. We have the space of unknown, both for the performers and the audience, in this process of interaction, which is constantly happening in the performing arts. So that's a huge challenge because there are different audiences. And when I get to the Ars Electronica, we'll get to the problem there. Then we have a problem with funding, or a division in funding. People that are deciding how to fund something like this have different ideas, different perceptions, and have kind of issues with how to kind of evaluate and judge, the possible outcomes of anything that is coming from this realm. Also, academia, confusion, like how do we actually connect? How do we understand each other? Where are we coming from? Social sciences, humanities, arts, or sciences. But within sciences also, quantum physicists are considered to be weirdos from the perspective of number of other scientific departments, and I guess a lot of other scientists envy you guys, because, you are now, the sexy scientists and they're not, so that's also a division that is happening quite often. Then methodologically, it's, there are different approaches methodologically when it comes to the creation of this kind of project compared to something that LP Duo also does in their regular work as composers, performers, artists. So how do we start and how do we develop the process of creation? But also this notion of research that I started discussing. What is different in this process, in the regular process of research that LP Duo does as artists in their artistic research process. Also, when it comes to the business, how do we translate the outcomes of this process? And because I'm working also as a creative producer and sometimes manager of LP Duo, how do we translate what they produce and what they create as outcomes of these processes into something that is seen by, for example, music industry as relevant or as monetizable or as something that they can present on the stage and somewhere. And again, the world of music, something where, from the beginning of the project Quantum Music, there was always a tension, because they are coming from the world of classical music, which is coded, which is kind of classified, which is kind of relatively, or not even relatively, but kind of quite static, basically since ever. And the idea of innovation or the idea of some space, which is a space of uncertainty in the realm of classical music, is kind of almost impossible. So getting closer to the end, you're just going into the case of Ars Electronica and what happened there. And I think it was very, very interesting and important kind of thing that happened to us, because all of these conflicts, all of these kind of, let's say, dualities or polarizations kind of clashed in the space of Linz, and Ars Electronica is one of the most important spaces and festivals for art and science projects. And for us, like this kind of image, like it was really important actually to kind of to understand that, we are performing right after the legendary Laurie Anderson that kind of was challenging these things and challenging these notions, since 1960s, 1970s in her work, and that kind of there is a continuation of these struggles and these questions that you're facing when you're entering these realms. This is just a short kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, nice.
Next place to say.
Yeah.
Alex, there is no sound, but don't worry.
And you know, after the performance, we had we have this, I think, for us memorable sort of encounter with the audience of Ars Electronica in the Ars Electronica Center, where we presented the duality instrument, where we presented the project, but then there we had the clash of various kind of these polarizations and interpretations. So what actually were dilemmas? So what is LP Duo doing? Is it artists presenting concepts of quantum physics? Is it artists explaining concepts? Artists performing? Artists engaging with the concepts? Artists experimenting with the concepts? Or artists playing in the concept of Huizinga's playfulness and play with the concept of quantum physics? So, of course, there are many dimensions of it, and depending on different performances, different aspects of it are happening. But this is where the clinch came, you know, when it comes to this communication with the audiences. But these are not just regular audiences. These are quite often either scientists doing arts or people interested in science, or artists doing science and so on. So very, very interesting mix of audience. So in a certain sense, one of the questions, you know, is like coming from like, is all of this allowed? All of this that you're doing, you know, and also the questions of what are the expectations of the artists that are engaging with the world of science? And I'm here quoting, like, there was one of the audience members that actually said there that, but this is not quantum music. and then when I asked her, so maybe, but what do you think quantum music is? What were your expectations? And then we got silence. And as we know, silence is a very important concept in music, and philosophy is also a quantum phenomenon. So this is So this is one of the really important I find very important findings and spaces where we opened even more space. So we're constantly opening more space for further iterations of this project. And I'll conclude with one of my favorite contemporary philosophers, Franco Bifo Berardi, because philosophers always, and especially nowadays, are quite pessimistic and grim and you know. And then he was asked by one of the students just in the recent lectures that I attended. He was asked, so where do you see the hope, Bifo? You know, you're talking about all these terrible things that are happening in the world. Where do you see the hope? So he saw the hope, and he says that I see the hope in the connection between poets and engineers, because poets have very interesting ideas that are coming not from resisting something that is not allowed, or something that following something that is allowed, but finding spaces in between which are not regulated. But the problem is they don't know exactly how to make that happen, but they have great ideas. When it comes to the engineers, nowadays, engineers can do whatever you can imagine. The problem is that they are led by wrong people. So he sees the hope in the connection between the poets and engineers. And this is where kind of poetically, philosophically, practically, I see the hope that comes out from the work of LP Duo and from a project such as quantum music. So thank you. This is all from me for the presentation formally today. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Alexander. That was brilliant. Since we started a bit late and we need to catch up with the rest of the schedule, maybe one short question if anyone wants to ask something. maybe.
I would like just to thank you, Alex, for presenting this, because actually I'm not aware also of these things, because I'm too much into all, yeah, I'm boiled as a fog inside. But I just wanted to say that actually, and I was sharing also that with Sander and others, and you mentioned Laurie Anderson. So she's one of the key, let's say, key researchers in music, researchers of new sounds, of new practices in music. And actually, we started to play inspired by the one record, and it's the record by Herbie Hancock and Chick Corea from 1970, An Evening with Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock, because this record was kind of amazing, recording of something that is actually not polarized, as you said. It was the music that united the complete specters of the opposite specters of the music, like popular culture, jazz, classical music. And it was really hard to explain and put it in a shelf in the music industry, but 70s were much more open. And I will just end it with this. I remember the first performance of Kraftwerk, famous German band, when they started like to do electronic music. And there is a famous recording from that, I think ZDF studio. And they started to do something called the first techno. And the audience didn't know what to do. So they were just sitting and then somehow starting to clap or So I felt that, and together with Sonia many times in our career, like starting the concert, and then people are like, but what is this? Is this classical music or jazz or pop? And then till the end, they just surrender. And go with us to the journey. So I think that's the kind of research, and that's something important for us as artists.
Okay. I also just wanted to add very briefly, my favorite question that we get many times is like, what exactly is quantum here? But the funny thing is we provide lots of explanation. We always have these very detailed programs where we explain everything, but people just don't read. And then I'm like, oh, read the program. And you have everything there.
Silence.
But yeah, silence. Thank you so much, Alex. Now let's move on to our next speaker. I'm very happy to welcome Dimpna Meyer. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She is an assistant professor and tenure track group leader in the Bio-Nanoscience Department of the Applied Sciences Faculty of Delft University of Technology. And now she will talk about how neurons form networks, because this is part of her research at the TU Delft. So please welcome Dimpna.
Thank you. While I'm setting up, I'm trying to find the correct.
Take your time.
Yes, I can just switch that around. I should say that also maybe that I'm not a quantum scientist. I'm one of these biologists that is jealous of the sexy quantum science.
Also.
Yeah.
We can see your presentation now.
Yes, all right, great. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this conference. It's really exciting to be part of to follow up on a interaction with an artist and to make it something that's more long term. And I'm very honored that this seems to be the case. So I'm very much also looking forward to the future that we have with the LP duo. So I will tell you about the work that we do in my research group in Delft. And I will add how interaction or conversation with artists helps us to do our research. So this is in a way sort of also my personal take on what we as a research group get out of conversation with artists. So to start off, in my lab, we study how neurons form networks. And this is very cheesy, and I promise the rest of the talk will not this cheesy. But when I look at a network of cells that you see here, where the cells are connected in different ways, and you can also ask questions like, how do these cells connect? What is the shortest path from one cell to another? And you have to imagine that all these cells have their own activity. Sometimes they really go on to do their own path, but there's also oscillations and synchronicity. So these just sometimes I can hear the music that these cells play. And this is, I think, really silly and cheesy, but I sometimes have this if I look at a picture like this. So this is a microscopy picture that a student in my lab took. And if I look at this, I can hear it. I can hear them make music together. But what I want to go a bit further than that. I hope to explain you how the interplay between the research that we do and the artists that we talk with, how that helps us to reflect and to imagine, and very importantly, to tell stories. And I think this is really reflects the duality also that Alexander just talked about. Well, to start with what we actually do in my lab. So we're interested in how neurons form networks, because in our brain, the neurons are organized into networks. Here you see a very simple network where neuron 1 is connected to neuron 2, and neuron 3 connects back to neuron 1 and neuron 2. This is maybe one of the few very simple networks that you can think of with 3 units. However, in reality, in the human brain, we have about 100 billion cells, so 100 billion of these units, which is 10 times more than the world population. And each of these neurons makes about at least 1,000 connections with other neurons, resulting in, let's say, 100 trillion connections. So let's say that the schematic at the left is quite oversimplified. Now what you see at the right here is a neuron from a mouse. So what you can do is you can actually dissect, so take out neurons out of a mouse brain, and you can grow them in a culture dish, and then you can watch these neurons with a microscope. And here what you see is one mouse neuron. The center blob is the core, the nucleus, and you can see all the branches that are coming off that neuron. And all the connections that it makes with other neurons are here visualized as green or red dots. The green dots are the inhibitory connections, and the red dots are the excitatory connections. So when we talk about how neurons form networks, this is a more realistic view of how one such neuron is embedded in a network. Now, for the rest of the talk, I think it will be useful to get to some basic neurobiology. What is important to know is that neurons are polar cells. This means that one end is very different from the other end. This is functional because neurons need to transmit information and store information. So they, just like an electrical circuit, they have to receive information and they have to send information. Now, the part where information is sent to the next neuron, this is what we call the axon. And axons can actually be as long as a meter, for instance, because neurons can run from your spinal cord all the way down to your toes. So this can be a very long part of the cell. And the part where signals are received is what we call the dendrites. I'm not sure if you see my mouse. Yes. So these are the dendrites here. This is where the signal comes in. And then it is being transported to the next neuron through its axon. Now the part where the signal sending part meets the signal receiving part is an actual connection. This is a connection between two neurons, and it's what we call the synapse. So in my schematic, that is right here. And again, this is schematic. So in reality, a neuron would be more what you see here at the right bottom, where all the branches are the dendrites, and one of those branches is the axon, where the signal comes in, and then the signal is conveyed through the dendrites. Now we know quite a lot already about how neurons function in these networks. So since they have to transmit information, there are two very important parts of this. They need to transmit information within their own cell, for instance, down to the toes, but also from one cell to another. They do this in two different ways. So in one way, they use electrical signaling, and in the other way, they use chemical signaling. And within one neuron, signals are transported by means of electrical signals, where there is a voltage change over the membrane that just really runs over the membrane to run towards the end of the neuron. And if you were to look at one moment in time, at one part of the membrane, you would actually see indeed a big difference in membrane potential. Now, the other way that chemical signals, signals are conveyed is in between neurons. So this is not with electrical signaling, but this is with chemical signaling. And here we know exactly which components are needed for this chemical signaling to occur. So in a nutshell, what happens is this is a synapse, what you see here. You can see vesicles with blue dots. These blue dots is what we call sort of neurotransmitters, small messengers. And these vesicles with these messengers can be released, and they're taken up by receptors, and then the signal is moving on. So we know quite a bit already about how neurons communicate. So in this electrical and in this chemical signaling way. And this brings us to the first interaction with artists that I would like to discuss. This is with one of the artists in residence that we had here in Delft. Her name is Simone van Saarloos, and she is a writer and poet and philosopher. And what she did to us is what we as researchers do to our science, maybe the mice in the lab or the reagents. She studied us very carefully. And actually for 1 hour, we had a 1 hour meeting with my research group, and she wrote down everything that happened during that meeting, up to the detail where Dimfna looks at her watch to check what time it is. And I want to read out loud 2 fragments that she wrote. So together we look at an article in Nature. Carol attached a speech bubble to the paper that she chose to discuss this week. It says, "What do you think of the new Nature house style?" The group shares some mild shock about the new house style of everyone's go-to journal. Carol doesn't like the changes. "It must be an improvement though," someone else responds. "They must have changed it to make it better." And now Simone says, "I'm touched by this assumption of progress, this spoiled expectation that controlled change must be catering you. Blessed be this cruel optimism." This is what I mean with a reflection. It almost holds up a mirror, and it makes me think, and my group, is it actually true that all the new research articles that come out and that we use in our work, are they really an improvement? Do they help us to understand this issue that we study to understand it better? Or maybe does it make it more complex or more make us more confused? The other fragment that I would like to share is the second one. Dimfla shares the other paper that she chose. And Mario points to the authors. "Oh, Dottie is there. Who is that?" Mario says, "He's the guy you always cite." Mario scans the paper's claim and calls it controversial. Not many people will believe it. But Simone says, But I guess the authors might more say, this is what we observed and think without giving it a conclusion. And this is what I use when I tend to say that we already know a lot about signaling of neurons. We know exactly how electrical signals are conveyed and how the chemical signaling is conveyed. Well, maybe that's a bit too bold, but at least this is what we observe and what we think, and we don't want to draw too much of a conclusion of it. But there's something that we don't really know, and this is how the connections are made. So we know how the communication works within a neuron, but we don't know why one neuron connects with neuron A, but not with neuron B. And since I have told you that we have 100 trillion connections in our brain, this is a very important question to understand the underlying organizational principles. And for this, we go into more detail. So now we have, I've shown you images from cells, but we go more into detail to molecules. And here again, you see a synapse, so the connection between two neurons. You can see here, this is part of neuron 1, and this is part of neuron 2, and this is where they connect. Now the scale, what we're looking at is 25 nanometers. This is about 10,000 times thinner than the diameter of a violin string, to give you some idea of the nanoscale that we're looking at. And you may think that I can see quite a lot. So here you see at the bottom right, you see the same picture. But actually, if I were to zoom in at this connection, so here you see the two membranes and the connection, and we try to identify the molecules, we really cannot. We cannot see what is going on there. So the technology is not good enough yet to, with high resolution, to identify the molecules that make up the connections in the synapse. And this brings me to the second conversation with artists that I would like to mention. This is John Walter, who was also an artist in residence, and he's a graphic designer, and he's a painter, and he loves to wear his VR glasses to think in a different world. And so this is what you see here at the right, is a part of a painting that he made when he was in our institute. And you can see that it's completely filled with shapes. And the shapes have a larger patterns, but also smaller patterns. And in a way, this is very similar to the synapse. I mean, the patterns are completely different from what we see in a biological cell, but I think there's really a correlation between the way that he makes his art, where the paintings are full, and you can go into more and more detail, and you will see more things. And so this also then helps us to sort of create an idea, even though the technology is not there yet, to create an idea of how synapses, for instance, may look like once we can improve the technology. So imagination is great, but we also like to actually look at things. We do like to look at things under the microscope. So instead of looking at cells, we actually work with the purified molecules. So we could not identify the purified molecules in the image that I showed you before. So what we do in my lab, we just make the molecules ourselves, and then we put them under a microscope. Then we know what's there, and we can also see them. So here in the image on the left and at the right, you can see the molecules. You can see the individual dots are molecules. I still find this amazing that you can actually visualize them. And again, take a look at the scale bar to realize what scale we're talking about. Now to give you a bit of a flavor of what we do. So no. It crashed. It didn't like the movie, I think. So I will start it up again.
We need to establish new connections.
A technical question, is this electron microscope images or?
Yes, these are cryo-electron microscopy images. Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, I think we're almost back.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Yeah. I removed a movie because I think that's what happens. Yeah. No. Yes. All right. So to just give you a little bit of a flavor of what we do, of the previous photograph, so we call this micrograph. Basically, it's a photograph that a cryo-electron microscope takes. We take about almost 4,000 of these images. This will result in let's say 500,000 particles, so 500,000 proteins. These 500,000 proteins, they are all different orientations, and we can classify this. So we can sort them to say, okay, this is a top view, this is a bottom view, this is a side view. And when we do that, we get a much better signal to noise ratio, and we can start to distinguish more features, and we can actually start to reconstruct these molecules in 3D. And when we have enough particles and a good enough resolution, so here was the movie that I just removed, but we can actually build the single amino acids that are there in that molecule, and we can come up to structures like this. And then we try to build stories around it, and we try to understand, okay, we've now purified one molecule of all these molecules that are there at the synapse, and we think that this molecule sits somewhere in that synaptic cleft, and we think that, okay, we have more information. Of course, we can think that it can change from this sort of compact conformation that you see at the right bottom to being more extended, and it's a very dynamic molecule, and that all of this can happen at the synapse that is here shown in large, what we wouldn't be able to see with this high resolution at the moment when we would directly look at the neuronal synapse. So we need to purify molecules for this. So this is how we then we have our finding with our discovery. We have identified, or we have visualized a new protein molecule, and we try to understand what it means when that is actually placed at the neuronal synapse. And I think this is where, very importantly, we can benefit a lot with interaction with artists. And I think a great example of that is the interaction that we had with the LP duo, with Sonia and Andrea. And one of the specific examples is the collaboration with Eliska, and she may tell more about that. So Eliska is a quantum scientist, and she can work with large data sets, and she can understand complex systems. We as biologists, we are not so good at that. We can visualize it. So we can visualize how neurons are in a network, or how these cells are in a network. But being a biologist and trying to communicate with quantum scientists, there's a lot of translation issues. I think it really takes time. And for me, the conversations that we had with LP Duo were really catalyzing the interactions that me and Eliska had. It was very useful because she would explain how her work fit with the quantum music part. I would explain for my part how, and just like having the conversation there makes me and Eliska work together better. And I think the two of us together with LP Duo also, I think this has resulted in a really great musical piece and really great collaboration. But I should really say that for me personally, this is something that I find this quite challenging, like how to communicate with scientists from a completely different field. So what is this duality again that Alexander was talking about? And also the storytelling, it's something that I think we as scientists can learn, and we can learn in my view, quite a lot from artists. I mean, just the sort of the questions like, when is a composition complete, or how to start and end a composition, how to turn an idea into a composition, or how to compose successful shared stories. This is all something that I struggle with from a more science perspective. Like, when is a science article complete, or what is an individual piece that I can now publish? And when I listen to the work of Sonja and Andrea, for instance, I feel that they are just really mastering this. They come up with musical pieces that are, you know, they're individual pieces, but they also have a big story together, and this is what I would like to learn from them in the future, and how I'd like to continue our collaboration. And I think for me personally, the story that I'm planning to tell in the next years is that trying to identify how neurons form networks is extremely difficult. As you can see, we can, with high resolution microscopy, we can look at the synapse, but we cannot identify the individual molecules. We can purify the molecules, and we can visualize their structure, but then we don't know exactly how it fits into the large picture. So what I want to do is I want to start a bottom-up approach, and I want to build such a synapse myself with cellular components, where I start with single, very simple cells, as you can see here at the left. And I want to introduce molecules that then cause the cells to cluster in a way, the most essential synaptic junction that you can think of. Now, here again, you see the synapse of the two membranes and molecules that connect it. And the story that I want to maybe prove is that I can introduce more and more molecules, and also molecules that are really part of this communication, the chemical signaling machinery. And that so then I can actually use high resolution microscopy to identify where the components are and how they work together, because it's something that I built myself, so I know exactly what is there. This is a story that I also hope to discuss in the future more with LP Duo, and have their input for, of course, creativity and new ideas that I think is sort of a general fact that where artists can help us. But in my view, I think especially the storytelling that they do is a great example for me. So with that, I would like to end, and here's a picture of my research group in Delft, and I would like to especially thank Eliska for a great collaboration that we have ongoing, and of course the artists in residence that we have had here in Delft, with a special shout out to LP Duo.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are again running a bit short time, so maybe someone's got a question quickly.
I hear so many comments.
Yeah, maybe after we finish with the presentations, we can have a discussion. I would just like to say,
yes.
How common is it to actually for these big research institutes to have artistic residences? Because, like, for example, in this part of the world, this is completely unheard of. Like Alex has said, the scientists think that we are completely useless, and why would they invite any of us there? So this is so fascinating to see that there is actually a possibility to share expertise and inspire each other. So is it just Delft or other institutes as well?
There are a few other institutes that sometimes have artists in residence, but I think within the Netherlands, we are the only institute I know of that really has a program for it. And yeah, I think we're quite privileged to have it. And it's, I think it's really amazing that we can put the A in the STEM and have that duality there.
Thank you so much. Then we will continue the discussion.
Sorry, just
yes.
shortly, not interrupt, but really it's great inspiration what you're putting on the table. And just what you said about when composition is ending, you know, when the process is finished, you know. And I will just add a little story as maybe inspiration. So there is a great movie, A Legend of the Pianist on Ocean by Giuseppe Tornatore. And it's by book by Alessandro Baricco. And there is a guy playing on a boat all the time from Europe to US. And then it is happening between, you know, the technology allowed music to be recorded. So they come, the engineers came to the boat to record his first record. And he said, like, I don't want my music to go without me. You know, I don't want to record any music because, you know, that's like capturing the moment. And that's when the music is becoming, of course, the object, but actually it's never ending. So when we record some music, often after that, we completely are changing the piece after and playing completely different. And it's it's just a piece that was, you know, captured at a certain moment. So I think the process is ongoing forever, probably. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yes.
My moment of the day. Thank you very much.
And now I'm very happy to welcome Eliška Greplova, whom Dinta has already mentioned. So Eliška is an assistant professor at the Kavli Institute of Nanoscience at Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. And she leads Quantum Matter and AI group, which works at the intersection of quantum technologies, artificial intelligence, and condensed matter physics. And she is actually a former PhD student of one and only Klaus. So they already know each other very well. Yes. So now let's talk about the Klaus. So now, sexy Eliška, please welcome.
Thank you, Ivana, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. There is a very hard-working crew right outside my window fixing a leaking roof, so there might be some noise interruption. So if you cannot hear me, just wave and we solve it as we go. I am super happy to be here and sort of discuss with all the other people who have been involved in this different LP Duo collaborations. I am enjoying the talk so far super much, and I'm really sorry I couldn't come to Belgrade. I am really motivated. It's one of my bucket list places to visit, so I hope next time there will be an opportunity. I wanted to, maybe it's a little bit experimental from my side, but I wanted to make a talk that is maybe a little bit more conceptual. I was thinking about how the collaboration with Sonia and Andrea impacted me and how it impacted other areas of my life other than a science and all the things it made me think about. So I decided to create more kind of like a hybrid talk that also goes beyond the things that we did here at the university. The subtitle is Art and Science Attention Co-Design. So the thing I want to talk about also corresponds a little bit to what Alexander was talking about in the first talk this morning. And there's this concept of attention. A lot of the points you were talking about really hit a point with me, because I think about these things a lot, because for us scientists, the attention is like a super crucial aspect of what we do. And I see similar in music, and working with artists and musicians is the same. But at the same time, we also live in the world where our attention is a product. It's a marketable thing that we are selling and people are buying, and it leads to this economy of constant availability. And when you are not available, you are losing money and followers. But so there is this sphere of a marketing existence and existing productively in this new 21st century economy. And to me, in a really harsh contrast to that, is this sustained attention that we actually need to do our jobs. So for me, this is a concept that I think about a lot these days, especially when I am trying to find 3 uninterrupted hours to actually think about quantum physics, when I am getting the flurry of notifications and calendar invitations that comes from all of the different spheres of my life. So for me, this was something that collaboration with LP Duo really touched upon in a really interesting way. So I hope to reflect on it and discuss a bit with you during this talk today. You may be aware there are nowadays these large-scale machine learning models where you can tell it a prompt and it will reply to you in a human-like fashion, or it will create a piece of art. Interestingly enough, the machine learning model, the underlying neural network architecture that these models are using, it's also called attention, because it's a very specific neural network way of how things get updated. Then computer scientists also call this attention. So I actually gave to DALL-E 2, one of these attention-based AI models, this prompt to model the attention economy in a social media age and highlight the relationship between the scattered attention and highlight of concentration. And this is one of the artwork pieces that came out. And I actually this is something that I connected with, because you see this kind of money and the scattering and how also things sort of get pulled together, not unlike in some of these artworks that Dimfna was showing in her previous lecture. So for me, this was very interesting to see that you can create such a piece of artwork. Now, in quantum physics, we think about attention in a very different way. And now, of course, as Ivan already mentioned, Klaus is my PhD supervisor, so I have to give a credit to him here, because it's because how he taught me quantum physics, how I think about these objects. So in quantum physics, we are dealing with something that we call a quantum wave function, which are these super high dimensional abstract functions that describe the behavior of the world on the most fundamental atomic level. So this is another DALL-E experiment with this prompt, when I was trying to come up with like some impressionistic visualization of how these high dimensional wave function could look like, because even for us, this is very hard to understand and visualize. And because these objects are so complicated, then they have sometimes this really weird implications about how information gets transferred, how things are correlated with each other. So those are these stories that you hear, like quantum mechanics is spooky and we proved Einstein wrong, and all of this, it comes from the very basic challenge of these objects we are working with are very complex, and sometimes the conclusions you draw from their behavior, they are very counterintuitive. But there is one thing that is very, very interesting and attention related, and that's the fact that if you actually observe a system in quantum physics, you can directly change its behavior. You may heard about this famous double slit experiment. Is this thing that if I am shining a light in the like 2 holes in a cardboard or something like that, if I am not measuring which holes the photon picks to go, it creates this beautiful interferometric pattern of really composing waves. The moment I start looking and can detect which photon went through where, it's over and I'm just getting boring pattern. So this is just something that our observations have a direct, really back action on the objects we are observing. So the attention is something that can be directly manifested and experimentally measurable. So for me, this is a very interesting, almost a philosophical thing to think about in the context of how we think about attention in these other spheres of our life and existence. For a quantum physicist, on the other hand, this is of course also a burning question. There is this fun essay / actually scientific paper, Attention, Intention, and Will in Quantum Physics, that was published at the end of the 90s, where the author is trying to connect these abstract contexts of attention and intention to actual concepts in quantum physics. Again, I had a lot of fun using the title of this essay as a prompt for this DALI attention model, gave, I think, some pretty interesting and beautiful artworks that I think I'm definitely gonna be reusing in some of my talks going forward. So this is just something that I wanted to pitch, and then maybe in discussion we can talk about it, what other people think about it. But really this concept of attention in a quantum physics maybe could be like a really new conceptual toy model for us to model and think about attention. So if we go back to music, of course, music in terms of attention is like super unique medium, the way it can completely transport you somewhere else and how it really requires sustained, constant attention. But there is also a span of how you can think about this. And then I can bring it back to John Cage, which is something that also Andrea mentions often when he gives talk, that this act of listening itself is very interesting, right? Because this 433 piece is really about orchestra sitting there quietly. I was reading recently in a book by Jenny Odell that I really like, can recommend super much. She was writing about her experience to listening to this piece by John Cage in a San Francisco Symphony after work. And she was describing this quiet, and they had this very specific inscenation piece. At some point, the conductor got up and used a blender to make himself a smoothie. And the people were just like existing on the stage as they were in their outside orchestra life for this 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And it was like weird and awkward for the audience, and audience didn't know what to do with it. And she reflects in the book on how she was sitting there in this quiet and with this like just random live noises for a bit. And then when she walked on the street, she had this revelation of actually here in San Francisco for the first time in a way that she never heard it. Like she was paying attention to all of this noises that happened on the street, and she had this like immersion experience that really happened as a consequence of going to the concert, where she had to sit in quiet for 4.5 minutes. So this was very interesting to me, because then I immediately started seeing this kind of concept in the art, like all over the world. Just to mention one thing, I want to mention this amazing artist Mariela Scafati. I just saw her exhibition in Berlin. She makes this monocolored posters where she puts together like pieces of her life, and they are again like, there is even one that mentions Twitter directly in a picture here, but they are really, it's again this thing that she discusses how we communicate in this very scattered things that outside of the context are completely like almost nonsensical. And this is also something that Jenny Odell discusses in this book that I mentioned on a previous slide, how like missing context on a social media can take so much, quality and sustained attention away from our lives. So if we now go back to Delft and back to music and quantum research, some of these things were reflected in our very first collaboration with Andrea, there is this noise that we have in the lab that is actually extremely, extremely annoying. I hope you will hear it. I will try to play it on my phone. Could you hear? No. Oh, pity. Okay, never mind. Then I can maybe share later the thing in the chat. But basically, this dilution refrigerator that you have the yellow drawing in the middle, they made a super insistent high-pitched noise when they are pumping. It's just like squealing with a periodic pumping. And when we work, we have to listen to that again and again and again. What Andrea and Sonia did, they took this periodic rhythm as a tempo keeping thing for this qubit neurofunk piece that I hope will be recorded soon, and you can listen to it. I don't want to play a low quality recording from my phone, but it's this super amazing funky kind of thing where some of the musical part came from this quantum neuro collaboration that Divna mentioned in her first talk, and the tempo, the beat, is this dilution refrigerator pumping. And when I heard this song, I enjoyed it so much. Like, I cannot say how much I love it. Like, it's my favorite thing right now. And one of the other days, I had one of those days when my office is without electricity because of this renovation. So I had to sit in the lab all day. And I was like, oh no, it's the headache day. It's the migraine day. I will hear this pumping and it will be horrible. And I heard the pumping and I didn't mind. I was sitting there all day working in a perfect concentration, and the pumping was in my brain somehow transferred into like a super, like a fun, cool background noise. And it really reminded me of this Jenny Odell experience that she said, I heard this John Cage piece, and then I experienced my environment completely differently. And I was reading the book after this happened. But when I read it, I was like, oh, I can really identify with this because of this quantum neurofunk piece. So this is very like a highest really physical level of how this piece of art can really change how one experience their environment. And for me, this was really transformative moment. And then going forward, just for myself and also with anyone else from the collaboration who would be interested in this, I am really interested now thinking about conceptualizing attention via this like direct observations of quantum system and via really thinking about there is this medium where attention has a measurable consequences. Could we create some kind of concept thing that creates maybe like an analog system through how the attention gets scattered on a social media within this attention economy that we live in? It's really something that now I'm really quite fascinated to think about. The final picture from a DALL-E generator, I asked it, okay, try to use quantum mechanics to conceptualize attention and mindful listening in a musical composition. It gave this. It's not very informative, but I think it's fun to see the atoms, and you can also see the signal of some sound in the art. So I thought that was fun to see. So with that, I get to the end of my talk. I want to thank Andrea and Sonia for like being here and working with us, and as Dimfna was saying, making our collaboration between the different parts of the Kavli Institute more interesting and just better, and also to Dimfna for being part of this neuroquantum collaboration. I didn't talk so much about my research, so if this is something you are interested in, you can just go to my website and find details there. But yeah, thank you for listening.
I have the sound here.
Yeah, you can play it now.
Maybe closer to the.
But you should stop the sound there.
Stop the
Just
sound.
mute. because we have the loop. We made the loop now.
Loop.
Little delay. So this is just the sound of the quantum computer from the lab. And then that's what Eliška wanted to add. And then we made from that kind of piece, later.
Yeah, that's the one that we heard yesterday.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you so much. Would anyone like to ask any questions?
Yeah, if I can just add a comment. So I mean, all the presentations, I'm really enjoying the same. Like the whole morning is so inspiring, and triggered so many different things in my mind. But like what Eliška was now talking about is just, I think Sonia and Andrea was we were discussing this, I think, for a long time, that with what they are doing, even outside of the quantum music project, thinking about the notion of attention economy that you were talking about here, what is happening today is, with the audiences and with the music, but also with the arts, is that the patience became a subversive category. Like asking for a focus and patience, is a huge subversion in today's world. So trying to do something like that is putting them on the edge of some sort of annoyance, aggression, poking into something which is sort of now bizarrely a world of peacefulness and chaos, in which kind of creates, and art is about embracing chaos in a certain sense, and working with chaos, while at the same time my job in a way as an arts manager is to try to find a balance between embracing chaos and finding some sort of peacefulness, and finding some sort of solitude between these two concepts. So I think like this is so inspiring, like how the way that we're connecting the idea of attention economy from the perspective of audience development engagement studies in my area, and at the same time, the concept connected to the quantum physics and the world of science is just, I think is so important and so crucial. So Eliška, thank you so much for the presentation.
May I add just a word to this? Thank you very much, Eliška. This is a great topic, speaking about attention. And just we have a feedback here, just a second. Because I hear myself as a robot.
It's because of.
Can you switch off the sound?
Full sound.
You have to switch off the microphone.
Microphone on Zoom.
Or microphone in the computer. Switch it off.
Or just mute.
Oh. Go to this.
Healing.
Sorry, just a moment. Może być settings for the sound, but on the input message.
Samo zaklopi poklopac Milošu da on pita.
A to? Nije. Treba mikrofon ubiti, znači u setting se volim. That's it, sorry. We need your attention just a bit more.
But Andro, we can hear you well now without the feedback. You can talk.
Yes, it's just that I have a feedback, then it's confusing me like a bit.
Okay.
But there, okay. I will try to do it with that, like a Kraftwerk I mentioned.
Okay.
You know.
So it's dead now.
Now it's dead.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. It's a great topic, and thank you so much. And I would definitely like if I'm really also enjoying, and I'm thinking of the ancient Greece, and how we can make this also these gatherings more often, because it's super nice. But what you said, actually, we were kind of trying to get attention here, because parallel with your talk, we are listening outside the building, because we are in the city center of Belgrade, and we are listening a guy playing a traditional old Serbian folk song on a violin. So it is like thinking about how actually we are giving a meaning to the listening, like you said, for annoying sound of the quantum computer, that for you in this environment, while you are working some other things, it's really annoying. But then if you put something else, if you add some kind of music, then you get some other suggestion, and then you have a completely another experience. So that's what is super cool. And there is a article we talked about with Alex also, called Quantum Listening, by composer Paulina Oliveros from 1989, I think. But everything is actually about the legacy of John Cage. But the question about attention is that we are so detached actually from ourselves, because all the time we need to do something else and to move the attention from ourselves. And then I think it became a panic if you are just, for most of the people, if you're just sitting and doing nothing, or just, there is no sound, there is no music, or whatever. So I think it's a big civilization topic now, with all the medias we are getting. We are filled up all the time with information. Thank you. Sorry, just a comment.
Anyone else wants to ask something? Yes, so actually we are now running right on time. We need to be careful about the schedule, because then Klaus has to go to the airport and
you keep talking after I leave.
Yeah, but we just want you to hear all presentations. So the final one today is going to be by Dr. Zander Otte. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yes. He is a professor of physics at the Faculty of Applied Sciences at Technical University of Delft. And he is currently a teacher in the Applied Physics program, providing courses in both quantum and classical mechanics. But he is also a musician. So he can now, he's got this duality within himself as both an artist and a scientist. So let's see how he can do jazz improvisation with atoms. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you so much for the introduction. Let me first set something straight. I am not an artist, not by any means, right? I'm just an amateur pianist in my spare time. But I am a professional quantum physicist. And today I want to talk about a little bit how I think there's a link between my work and my hobby, and how there is a mutual inspiration between the two. And I want to emphasize that the visit of Andrija and Sonja in Delft actually kind of inspired me to think about this and to look into these links. And if you start to think about it, there is more to it than you might think at first sight. And it was actually fun to do this. So I have as a title jazz improvisation with atoms. It's funny that I'm speaking now after Eliška. I actually asked Dali to give me a painting of atoms playing jazz, but Dali had difficulties with interpreting that. So in the end, I did not get a picture of that, but I did give it a try. Okay, so I am here in my living room. So here you see my piano, and there is my Christmas tree in the back. And actually, both of them play a role in today's talk, because I will play at the piano a few times, and I will play different versions of the song "Oh Christmas Tree," "O Tannenbaum." Back when I wrote the abstract for this talk, I thought it was a brilliant idea. And as the date approached, I got more nervous and nervous. And last night I barely slept. Right, so this is so bear with me. I'm not at all used to performing piano. I give many talks, but performing like this is very scary for me. So please bear with me. So. My research is on individual atoms. So here on the left of the screen, you see basically an impression of what we do. We have a scanning tunneling microscope. I'll tell you what that is. And then we can interrogate individual atoms. And these atoms, these balls, they have a big arrow pointing through them. And that is to signify that these are magnetic atoms. So you can view these arrows as kind of the compass needle of the little magnetism that resides in that atom. And by giving little voltage pulses to the atoms, we can twist the magnetism of these atoms around. And then the different magnetic atoms start to interact with each other. They feel each other, but they do so in a quantum manner. And that makes it very intriguing. Okay, so let me give a bit of an idea. This was supposed to work. Hold on. Yes, it works. Okay. So here you see the idea of a scanning tunneling microscope. So on the right, you see the idea. It's a very sharp metal needle that almost, but not quite, touches a surface. And then you can basically feel what is on that surface. And that needle is so close to the surface that there's only a gap the size of a single atom. And that enables you to really feel individual atoms sticking out from the surface. And if you scan line by line, you can make a picture. And on the left, you see such a picture. Of course, the picture is made by a computer, but it is done by direct interpretation of these height profiles measured with the microscope. So I think you can really say that you are looking here at individual atoms. These are individual magnetic atoms, each of these little bumps that is sticking out. Now, such a microscope is actually not so big. So on the picture on the right, you see the microscope. It's about this big, right? 10 centimeters or so. But we have to do our experiments in very extreme experimental conditions, such as super low temperatures, super high low pressures to keep things clean, very high magnetic fields, and all that together make it quite a difficult experiment. So on the left picture, you see the machine that the microscope is embedded in, and that is a machine that is this big, right? A few meters in the ground footprint. Now, an STM can be used to see atoms, but in the 90s, it was found that you can also use it to move atoms. So this is a very famous picture measured at IBM, where they assembled a number of these atoms into a circle. I was 13 when this came out. I saw it in the newspaper. I was very intrigued by it. And what you see specifically is that inside that circle, you see a wavy pattern. And that wavy pattern is essentially an electron wave, but according to quantum mechanics, that is a wave. It's an electron wave that is kind of captured, it's caught inside the circle. And so you can read out basically the wavelength of the electron. It's a direct visualization of quantum mechanics. Now, in my lab, we also move atoms, but we focus on the magnetic atoms. And these are magnetic atoms that is a bit of an experimental detail, but they have to sit on a particular surface in order for us to do our experiments, which makes this manipulation harder, but still we can build some structures. So here you see on the left, you see a structure of 3 by 3 atoms, and on the right, you see a chain of 5. And these are actual magnetic atoms that interact with each other that we can investigate. Now, the question then, of course, becomes, how do we see the magnetism of these atoms? So for this, we use a technique called spin polarized STM. And this is done, it's hard to believe maybe, but you just attach a single magnetic atom to the end of the tip of the needle, so that all the electrons flowing from the tip are spin polarized, which means that there is more electrons which spin up than spin down coming out. And then you can feel the difference between an atom that is on the surface that is pointing along or opposite to the tip. And then if you look on the right, you see 15 atoms that we assembled into a rectangle. And these atoms are all exactly equally big. They're the same atoms, but on the picture, you see very closely that one is taller than the other one. They're in an alternating pattern of slightly taller, slightly less tall, slightly taller. And that is because we are reading here the magnetism of these atoms, and they are forming an anti-ferromagnet. So the spins of these atoms are alternatingly up and down. Now here I'm going to show a video. Hopefully it doesn't crash. So this is a recording of our STM taken a while back. And then on the bottom left in the blue square, you see 8 atoms that are being assembled. If I can use the pointer here. So these over here are the 8 atoms. And then this little red dot over here, right? That is the location of the tip. And the tip is parked over one of these atoms and is measuring its magnetism. And then that structure of 8 atoms can be in either of the 2 compositions that is shown on the right bottom, right? So it's either north, south, so up, down, or oppositely down, up, down, up. And then on the top right, you see this green curve that is recording real time. And sometimes there's a jump. So let's wait for a second. And there's a jump, see? So that means that at the moment the current jumps, the entire structure flips from the one state to the other state. So all the 8 atoms flip their sign and go into the opposite magnetic state. And it does so by a mechanism that is called quantum tunneling and magnetization. So what happens here is that these structures are really on the border between classical and quantum. So for a certain time, they behave classically, they're stuck in a certain state, they're really up or down, right? But then sometimes they still flip because they're not quite classical. There's still some quantumness in them left. And you can actually measure that in these experiments, which is quite wonderful. Okay, so this is an anti-ferromagnet, and this is the first moment where I'm going to play the piano. So let me play "Oh Christmas Tree" for you, and then I'll talk about it in a moment, why I play this particular style. You can hear the piano, I hope?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, I'll keep it short. Somebody says playing music. Yeah, this was supposed to be music. Oh, that's the computer says that. Playing music. Let me switch that off. The computer was asking me if I was playing music.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, never mind.
Yes.
Anyway, maybe. So this was hard for me to play. Does anyone see why I play this particular style in relation to the anti-ferromagnetism? Does anyone see the link? Because it may be hard to find. But the reason was that on the left hand, I played this. Right? That is called a stride left hand, where you make jumps. You go bass, chord, bass, chord, bass, chord. So you go low, high, up, down, up, down, up. That's the anti-ferromagnet that I was trying to show. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because this style, this stride style, is a very early jazz style that developed in New Orleans around the turn of the century, 1900. And it was actually, it's not quite jazz yet. They used this style to mimic the motion of a brass band. So a street band that goes pa, right? They try to mimic that on the piano. So it's very static. And it doesn't leave much room for freedom, for syncopation, for swing, right? It's very static. It's also, as you notice, really hard for me to play because my full brain capacity goes to that left hand. And so, yeah, if you would have run a Windows Task Manager during my playing on my brain, you would have seen that it was 100% occupied with that left hand all the time. And now, of course, you can make jokes about my brain power here. I don't mind, go ahead. But this was occupying all of my brain power, and it's really hard. Okay, so that was the first kind of style that I wanted to show. And that was the anti-ferromagnet. Now, let's move to the next step in my research. And then we go to another technique that we used in the past, which is called inelastic electron tunneling spectroscopy. This is a technique where we actually measure at which energies certain quantum excitations occur. Now, I'm not going to go into details here. It's way too detailed and it's not appropriate for this talk. But it enabled us to do the following. So we built, in this case, a ferromagnetic structure of iron atoms. So these are 6 iron atoms. And on the left side, you see, I have to move here to move my pointer, but here on the left side, you see they're either all up or all down. So this is a ferromagnet. And then also, you see there's time traces. We could measure how often they switch. But more importantly, we could do a study with this other technique to see at what energies certain excitations occur in this ferromagnet. So over here, you see basically these are measurements taken on our 6 atoms. And then over here, you see that a certain quantum excitation happens on the first atom. It does not happen on the second. It does happen on the middle 2 and then not on the 5th. And it does happen again on the 6th. Right, so that's kind of a wavy quantum state that exists on that chain. So what you're looking at here are actual quantum waves, magnetic quantum waves that live on top of that ferromagnetic background. And then again, the ferromagnet is another inspiration for some interpretation of O Christmas Tree. So let me play a ferromagnetic version of that. So here we go. Something like this. So here I played, yeah, it's not very impressive, not compared to what you guys played, but still. Here I played, my left hand was up all the time. And that made it much easier for me. It freed up my brain to do more with my right hand. And maybe you noticed that I took a little bit more freedom here and there to kind of improvise. And that made the music much more interesting, I think, even though it was simpler to play. So that was ferromagnet. Okay, so let's move on. So now we go to a recent experiment that one of my students did in a collaboration with a group in Seoul, in South Korea. This is now, again, an anti-ferromagnetic chain. So these are 5 iron atoms that are anti-ferromagnetically coupled. So they can be in either of those 2 states that are depicted on the right. So here I let the arrows point right and left rather than up and down, but it's still the same, right? It can either be in up, down, up, down, up, down, or in down, up, down, up, down. And again, you can measure the lifetime between those 2, so how often they quantum mechanically switch between the states. Now, what was found in this work is that if you apply a magnetic field perpendicular to that chain, so perpendicular to the magnetization axis, we call it the transverse field, something very fascinating happens. And this is called a diabolic point. And let me quickly introduce that. So here on the bottom, you see what happens as a function of magnetic field. Let's start with a very low magnetic field. Then you have 2 states. It's either up, down, up, down, up, down. We call it NA. That's Néel state A. Or down, up, down, up, down, up. Néel state B. But, and this is very important, each of them has a little bit of a contribution of the other state in it. That's the quantum nature, right? So if it's in NA, it has a little bit, faintly, also NB in it. And when it is NB, it has a little bit of NA in it. And this is quantum mechanics, and that allows that switching between the 2. Now, if you apply this transverse magnetic field, you go through something that is called a diabolic point. And a diabolic point refers to the diabolo, which is a toy, right? And the diabolic point is a point in parameter space where there is a crossing or a voided crossing between those states. It's a bit detailed, but if you go beyond that point, then again, you have 2 states, one that is almost entirely NA and the other one is almost entirely NB with a little bit of the other state involved. So you might wonder, why do you do this? What's interesting? Well, the important thing is that the phase, and that's basically the sign, right? So you start here with a plus, and there with a minus, but on the other side, there's a minus here, there's a plus there. And that is called the quantum phase. It's very important in quantum information, what the phase relation between the different states in the superpositions. And here it switches sign. right? The bottom state goes from plus to minus. And that means that if you go from plus to minus at some point, and that's of course in the middle, it must be 0. So in the middle, you will basically kill the extra contribution of the other state. And there your states are really fully NA and fully NB. And so in the middle, there cannot be quantum tunneling of magnetization between the two states. You have killed it because you're going through this very particular diabolic point. So this is, I think, a beautiful form of quantum engineering where you find a particular point in parameter space. And this big formula in the middle is called a Hamiltonian. Of course, don't focus on it too much, but there's two terms in there that start to fight with each other. Basically, it's the transverse anisotropy and the transverse field. And at some point, they cancel, and that is where this interesting point is. So if we sweep through that point, we see that indeed we do those lifetime measurements. We measure how often they switch, how often they go to the other state, and that lifetime increases. So at some point they hardly switch anymore. It becomes even more evidence in the longer chain. So this is the 6-atom chain. You see that in around the diabolic point, the lifetime increases by 3 orders of magnitude. So you make it 1,000 times, let's say, less quantum by going through that point, and you hit that particular diabolic point, which is a result we're very happy with. So that brings me to my third interpretation of a Christmas tree, which is the quantum magnetism. And now, of course, it becomes interesting. We're no longer stuck with either, a left hand that has to go up, down, up, down. We don't need it to be up all the time. We can let it do anything we like. And now, of course, things become interesting. So let me play my final version of our Christmas tree. So, you're welcome. That was, of course, this sounds much nicer than the rest, right? It allows me to be free and it allows me to play anything I like. And that, of course, is the inspiration that I get also in my work when I do quantum physics. Okay, so I'm reaching the end of my talk. Let me just, so the examples I gave here were, of course, a bit simplified, right? So the left hand going up, down, and fixing that to anti-ferromagnetism. I think there is a deeper level of analogy between my work and my hobby. And that is the following. So when I do my research on quantum magnetism, there is a number of what you could call improvisation tools, right? There's a number of things that I can play with to make things interesting. For example, I can play with the magnitude of the spins. They can go integer, half integer. The physicist will know what I'm talking about. I can play with the crystal anisotropy that forces the spin to orient along a certain axis and kind of disregard other axes. For example, I can play with external magnetic fields that are either global or local and in a certain direction. I can play with how spins talk to each other. It's the exchange interaction, or when they're further apart, the dipolar interaction. There's also something called the Dzieleczynski-Maria interaction that causes spins to spiral in chains, very fascinating, caused by the spin-orbit coupling. And finally, there's also hyperfine coupling, something we're recently working with to study the nuclear spins. And I showed you this Hamiltonian already before. And for example, the Hamiltonian I showed you here has 4 of those components kind of put in there. And what happens here is that, of course, I know mathematically for each of those things what they do. right? This is known, this is written down. And yet, when I put them in a Hamiltonian like this, and I start to calculate, or when I build them, I put the atoms together, and I have these kind of elements put together, these ingredients put together. I don't know exactly what is going to come out, even though I know the rules, I know the basic rules. What is going to happen is a bit of a surprise, it's a bit of a mystery every single time. And so you could call that emergence. And that, I think, is really how the world works, how the universe works, right? The rules can be basic and simple, but especially when you have many degrees of freedom, when you have big objects with many atoms, all kinds of stuff can happen if you just mix those individual tools together. And this is a very nice link with my hobby. So if I look at jazz piano, there's many tools I could use, right? For example, I could use a chromatic line. I did it already a few times. For example, let me do it. That's a chromatic line, right? I could play a bebop approach. There's a bebop approach rather than this. I could, right? That's a bebop approach. I could play with extensions. For example, when I have this final, this is the dominant chord. I could add a 9. I could put a 9 here. I could play a 13. I could play a minor 13. So there's so many different things I can play with. The other one that I really love is the tritone substitution. I want to show you that. So if I play this last bit, I could do this, but I could also do this. There I replace the dominant chord, which used to be a C. I replace it with a F sharp. And the F sharp is the tritone substitution of the C. It's a very detailed thing, but you can always do that in jazz. And I learned that recently, and I was so excited, right? Every time you see a dominant chord, I could just switch it to the tritone, and it will sound nice. And of course, I cannot always predict what it will sound like, right? I do that while playing, and then oh, it sounds like this, nice. But I know beforehand that it will sound good. Another one, there's the diminished chord. I did it at some point. Let's see. This. That's the diminished chord I played. I can play sus chords. And then this. That's sus chords. Another thing to play with. Well, there's many examples. And just as in my work, I can kind of combine these different rules, and it shows up. It gives me new surprises every time I play, just like every time I put my atoms together. So this was roughly what I wanted to share with you today. I need, of course, to acknowledge some people. On the left side here, you see my current group members, without whom I would never have been able to do this work. And on the right side, you see my collaborators for the particular research I showed you on the diabolic point that was done with them. And also I acknowledge support from the Dutch Science Council, NWO, and from the European Research Council. And with that, I come to the end of my talk. Thank you, and Merry Christmas.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and Merry Christmas to you as well. Let me just ask Klaus, when would you have to leave? Is it
5-10 minutes or so?
Yeah. Because we don't want to leave abruptly, but thank you so much for all these connections, and we are really happy that you have a profound understanding of how this interaction between music and quantum science actually works, and what sort of analogies can be drawn between essentially very different phenomena, but actually which follow the same sort of logic. Would anyone like to ask Xander any questions or to comment on these wonderful renditions of songs?
This was really wonderful, Xander. Thank you so much for doing this and playing us all the intros of the atoms. I just want to add something, you know, to finish in a positive way, because of course we are living in a strange and hard times, and we are talking a lot about this. I think we are all under impressions of what all is happening in the world today. But you know, we were speaking last night, like in 1965, Duke Ellington was announced to receive a Pulitzer Prize. But then the composer said, like, jazz is not an art, jazz is not a music, you know. So I think the positive thing is that today, you know, music open to all genres, and in 2018 also the hip hop artist Kendrick Lamar received the Pulitzer Prize. So I think we are in that way opening the frontiers, and somehow that's kind of a positive things that are happening beside all these others.
Definitely, yeah.
Sandra,
No, I really want to thank you, Andrija, because like I said, right, I've always viewed these things as separate, right? There's my work and there's other things, but why not combine them, right? And open your mind a bit, and it helps also to reach out. So rather than being a quantum weirdo, as Alexander called me in the beginning, it's okay, no offense taken. But then it's nice to also you know, be a bit more human and try to yeah, I know, try to see links and use those. And really, thanks to your interaction, I was put on that path.
Thank you, and thank you all for opening your science, your ideas, your creativity, your life experience, and sharing with us. Thank you so much.
can you please stop? Can you please stop sharing your screen? I want to take a joint screenshot of everyone. We can see you.
I just had one comment, Sandra. So I think, thank you also very much for making this clear, the improvisation element in doing the physics. I think it's also important that we use this opportunity to tell that science is not something done by machines and robots and something where we predict and just do things, but we are also using our creativity. But I also would like to second what you ended up saying, and thank our very good colleagues here for making us think more about that, and also inspiring us to do that even more.
Yeah. Thank you.
The other review for the picture.
Yeah. We just need to change the view so that we can take a joint screenshot.
Sorry.
Yeah. Now, everybody ready to smile? Thank you. I would like to also introduce my wonderful young colleagues from the Institute who have helped to organize this whole event. So we have so Stefan, Milos, Maria, and Bojana, and Monica also, who is online today. So not here in the office, but they've been very helpful in putting together this event. And thank you so much. We really learned a lot from these presentations and this kind of, you know, interaction between us all. It is really precious for everything that we do. I will write to you separately about the possibility maybe of making your presentation or parts of your presentations available online, if you would be interested. Also, if you're interested in publishing some parts of this research, we would also be happy to organize that. I can speak with some editors of my music-related journals, because you probably publish a lot in these scientific journals. You've mentioned Science and others, but actually I would like to maybe prepare an issue for a journal like Music Theory Spectrum or Contemporary Music Review or something like that. So would you be up for that? Yeah.
I would need to think about that, but yeah.
Even when muted, we see the approval in your eyes. So all good. Well, thank you so much. I'm sorry that we have to end now because Klaus has got a flight to catch, but it's really been a privilege to have you here. And also we're hoping that you will be able to continue your collaboration with LP Duo. And also our institute is very open to this type of art and science projects. So in the future, we might think of maybe doing something together as well. And thank you once again. Thank you. And with this, we officially end our Fun to Music project, which has been going on for like 7 years.
Have a good flight, Klaus.
Thank you.
It's